Doug is presenting to us today in collaboration with a number of folks that you've worked with on this project, looking at trends in soil-borne disease on long-term organic vegetable farms in the West. And Doug is well poised to work on this, as he's been providing on-farm consultation and field monitoring, and also working on research for organic vegetable farms for quite some time now. And previously he was also an adjunct professor of horticulture at Cabrillo College, and he was a former RF board member, and I'm a current one, so we have something in common. And he also is a co-owner, or was a co-owner of an organic produce brokerage, a crop production manager, and also has worked on the farm himself. So lots of experience, and I'm happy to have him presenting today. Take it away, Doug.
All right, thanks everyone for coming today. I was really kind of happy to see that our friend from the USDA was interested in integrated and whole systems research, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today. Is a very small portion of a group of us that's got together to look at whole farm systems, and it's a fairly controversial area, and especially for me as a sort of a failed former research scientist who, follows the scientific reductionist method, to find myself involved in research that really isn't amenable to that kind of reductionist, identify the factor that's responsible kind of thing. And so I can kind of wear two hats on this. I understand the people who are skeptical, and I understand the people who are in favor of this kind of research, and I'd like to try and kind of bridge the gap today and maybe make it possible for all of us to work together in trying to uncover what it is about successful organic farms that makes them successful so that other organic farms can become successful. So this thing on disease, the backstory, which a lot of you will be well aware of, is that many soil-borne plant pathogens, they increase over time, and even in farms that are practicing some crop rotation, they just seem to get worse and worse and worse over the years. Eventually, conventional farmers will fumigate if they need to keep growing that crop and they can't rotate out of it, and organic farms don't have this option. So for the long-term sustainability of our system, if organic farmers can farm for 30 years, discover they have a bad soil-borne disease, and then not be able to fumigate, that's not particularly sustainable. So we want to try to prevent that from happening. And I think all along, a lot of us involved in organic have had this assumption that if we farm well organically, and this means, extra crop rotation, the enhanced biological activity that we get from organic farming, reduced pesticides, we'll get a healthy soil that will in turn wear out the pathogens that are there. The microbial community will start eating them up, and they really won't get a chance to infect our plants. And I think from the time I ever started doing plant pathology, this has been an intriguing and frustrating idea that kind of makes sense in one way and kind of doesn't make sense in others. So we really wanted to sit down and see if we could start to answer this. So we know that organic matter and amendments and cover crops suppress some soil-borne diseases. It's been known for quite a while. Alex Stone, who would have been here presenting today, but she decided to stay in Oregon, where the weather's better, did a lot of this stuff that, these things suppress some soil-borne diseases, especially the oomycetes. The most research is Pythium damping off, and so we know that. But the bigger question is, do the practices of organic farms suppress all soil-borne diseases? Just a quick reminder of what the Organic Toolbox for Healthy Soil is, and over the years I've become a little more hard-edged about this, that there's organic farms that follow the laws, and there are organic farms that follow the spirit of organic. And I think for the ones that are following the spirit of organic, this means intensive cover cropping, long crop family rotations where you don't plant the same plant family in the same field very frequently. The use of amendments, and particularly high-quality, compliant compost, few or no biocides, so anything that is going to kill biological life in the soil is avoided, and then reducing soil tillage to keep organic matter percentages, if not even, then increasing. So that's what I think the toolbox is, and my feeling is that studies that are done on organic farms to make conclusions about organic farms in vegetables, where these sorts of things are not going on, are not really following the spirit of what organic farming is, and you've got to consider how important that kind of research is if it's kind of done on the organic farms that are following the rules, but not really the spirit. So the project's huge. We have 5 different farms and farmers. We have a big staff at Oregon State University, at Washington State. So a bunch of us, and mostly funded by Western SARE, but also some funds from OSU. So I've been scouting fields for 25 years. You know, every day going out in my boots and walking through fields, scouting for problems, any kind of problem, pests, diseases, harvest quality, when things are going to be ready, voles and birds, you name it, everything. And so we had this kind of unique opportunity where we had these economically successful farms that were willing to cooperate with us, that were following both the letter and the spirit of the Organic Foods Production Act, 25 years or more with the same letter and spirit of management. And then, yay, they kept good records. So scouting, yield data, organic soil analysis, soil tests for 25 years, all these records are available. And then, of course, for any of you, those of you who work with farmers, having cooperative and knowledgeable farmers is very important. And our farm records show that we have increasingly healthy soils, both by the tools and techniques that were documented and the lab analysis. We also see changes in plant health, and we do this through looking at crop yields, and in this case on looking at soil-borne diseases, the severity of the soil-borne diseases. We're also investigating different pests. Last year we did a thing on cabbage worms. So we're using all this data to try and look at a bunch of different things. And so this soil-borne disease is just part of this whole program. But I think that with all this kind of unique opportunity, it really gives us a chance to ask, does healthy soil make a healthy plant? The key really is 25 to 30 years of the same organic management. And this is a unique opportunity because organic in the United States doing this kind of thing really isn't much more than 25 or 30 years old for the large majority of farms. So it's really kind of an exciting career move for me to turn 25 years of sludging through the mud into something that might be interesting from a research standpoint. So what I want to do is present 2 of the farms and the disease problems or successes that they've had, so we can kind of come to our last slide where we decide if healthy soils mean healthy plants. The first one is Persephone Farm in Oregon. 30 years under organic management, summer and winter cover crops, manure compost amendments, long family crop rotations, 4 years of rotation, and then a sod and pastured laying hen one, which is a real neat and important rotation, I think. They believe in infield weeds for various reasons, insectary plantings, and then they have this native forest and riparian borders, which we found so important in cabbage worm suppression. So the first disease is Clubroot of Brassicas. You'll see the healthy plant on the left and the unhealthy one on the right, caused by a fungus. Has a medium host range. The change over time, which would be the scouting, and Alex Stone did a lot of this, the farmer did a lot of this, was that there was none in 2007, and it's currently in specific locations. A map of the farm, and that's where the clubroot is. And then, you know, we really want to know, is this clubroot affecting crop yield? So you see on the right a graph of crop yield of cauliflower and broccoli over time. And you can see what most farmers already know, that yields go up and down for various reasons. And if you study a farm for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, you, depending on where you start, you may end up in some kind of a curve that's telling you something completely different from what's really going on. So again, this unique opportunity to look at these yield records over 30 years allows us to smooth out these curves and see if we're really having some kind of loss going on. And as you can see, you can't draw really a very good straight line through it, but we're not really seeing any losses. So, you know, the farmer comment, which we felt was extremely important, you know, what does the farmer think after observing all this, you know, is tolerable but vigilant. So it's on their radar. It's something they're worried about. It doesn't appear to be increasing, but it doesn't appear to be really decreasing either. So that's Clubroot. Here's an upsetting thing if you're a farmer. These are the yields of all the cucurbits on Persephone from 1990 to 2014. And you can see a general trend downwards, which is nothing that a farmer really wants to see. So what's going on? All right, this is cucurbit root and crown rot wilt. The diagnosis ongoing. This is extremely frustrating to plant pathologists like myself when you have 4 different likely pathogens. When you isolate, you get 1 or more of them, but you never get a consistent result. Causes a wilt. You can see the discoloration in the stem tissue there and the roots that are all blackened, and then you can see, of course, the effect on the crop. The host range, some narrow, it's possibly wide, but generally cucurbit, the cucurbit family. The change over time, increasing. The farmer comment, not controlled, serious. And the yield, as you saw, losses, and they're reducing the acreage. So after 30 years, a very serious disease that is yet not under control. So there's a bad one. I don't have any data for the Fusarium wilt of spinach except what Alex told me about the scouting, that basically this disease is increasing, not controlled, serious, the farmer says, and the yield is seriously affected and reducing acreage. So there's a second disease. So we've looked at 3, 2 are getting worse, 1 seems to be under control. But I don't want to leave you with this idea that this is it. I mean, there are many, many different diseases, soil-borne diseases that affect vegetables, and these are the only 3 that we can talk about. The other ones are not there. So they're found in Oregon. They're not found in this farm, or if they are, it's an amusing anecdote rather than something to worry about. All right, our second farm is Phil Foster Ranches. He has locations in San Juan Bautista and Hollister. 26 years of organic management, about 300 acres, mixed vegetables and tree fruit, oat or oat veg crop between every 2 cash crops, an incredible dedication to cover crop rotation. And compost, 8 tons compost that he makes on farm and 2 tons of gypsum per year. Long plant family crop rotations, and then a whole bunch of the other things that we see on successful organic farms. Hedgerows, infield insectaries, intensive crop scouting, reduced soil tillage with spaders and flamers. And both Persephone and Phil Foster Ranches are real going concerns. So another thing, you know, we can study organic farms that may be, you know, stumbling along. I think that when we really want to draw conclusions about whole farm systems, we need to look at economically successful organic farms, not in and of themselves, but just as this is something that is working in our marketplace. And if it's not working in our marketplace, then perhaps we need to understand why rather than using it as a case study. All right, so here's my life for the last 17 years on Phil Foster Ranches, is going out there every 3 days a week, filling out these reports until the last few years, handwritten. There's a portion of one from 2001, and Nat McKinney, who's in the audience today, was wonderful in transposing this all to a digital spreadsheet, which you can see below. There were 35,309 total observations, 14,000 for pests, and 461 for soil-borne disease. And I mean, there's nothing scientific about this, obviously. We don't have 4 farms and randomized complete plots of different scouts and all that kind of thing, but it's pretty profound to think that I made 35,000 observations and only 461 of them were soil-borne disease. So by far, non-soil-borne disease is bothering this organic farm. So the way we handled this was, you can see the lightworm damage that's circled there for the broccoli cauliflower. It ends up with its own little square in the spreadsheet, and then it gets a number value, which you probably can't see, but right there, which is number 2, which is a way of turning qualitative observation into a quantitative one. So one of the things that I'm trying to improve with my scouting now is to use quantitative data whenever I can. So if I've looked at 20 plants, 4 have the disease, 16 don't, and that's on my report. This is a new idea, and it was actually driven by the farmer because he got tired of me saying, you know, there's a medium number of aphids. You know, how do I use that? So it forced me to go back and say, yeah, how do you use that? Let's make it quantitative. So now I'm much more quantitative, but originally it was very qualitative, and that had to be fixed. So the way we fix it is for each pest or pathogen, we have a scale for converting the qualitative to the quantitative. Here's an example for Verticillium wilt of melon. So severity score is 0 to 5. The primary descriptor, which would be the thing that really affects us in farming, so going from the first signs of the disease to the whole field showing it. And then there are all these descriptors. With 35,000 observations, I used a bunch of different descriptors. I wasn't entirely consistent. We needed a way of changing that descriptor into something that would be quantitative. And so, you know, occasional light, signs, and symptoms all kind of refer to several plants, whereas vine collapse pretty much refers to the whole darn field going down. So that's how we went from quantitative or qualitative to quantitative, and I could imagine a number of questions picking apart what we actually did here. Again, the idea is many, many years, many, many observations. The quibbles we have with what class one thing ended up in or another hopefully are overwhelmed by the big data that we have. And I'll leave it up to you guys to decide if that's good enough or not. All right, let's run through some of the diseases at Phil Foster Ranches. The first one is Phoma on beet. I didn't actually have a good picture, but it causes a leaf spot and a root rot. The host range is pretty narrow, just the beet family. I saw it early on, haven't seen it since 2001. The farmer comment, of course, is, huh? And yield not affected. It's surprising farmers are less interested in soil-borne plant disease than plant pathologists. The second one, Clubroot, which we saw at Persephone. The host range, you know, is the Brassica crops. The change over time, haven't seen it since 2008. Again, the farmer wasn't impressed. And yield not affected. Lettuce drop, Sclerotinia minor. The host range is medium. It goes to a bunch of different vegetable crops and some weeds and even some cover crops. So the scouting saw it regularly and some losses through 1998, but not seen since 2001. You know, Phil's not, yeah, whatever, not a problem, yield not affected. And I should mention that I've been on Phil's farm since 1990, but I only started consulting for him in 1997, so I do have some pre-1997 observations, but they're not very complete. Phytophthora root rot of pepper causes a wilt and a rot, as you can see on the right there. The host range is pretty narrow. change over time. So if we look at the graph down here, we've got the severity on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. In the early 1990s, you could go through and see fields of his with peppers with a fair amount of losses from this disease. And then you see pretty sporadically since about 1999. Every once in a while I see it and I get pretty excited because it's fun to see, but I'm also excited because it's not a problem. All right, Anthracnose of Lettuce. This causes a leaf spot on lettuce, but it is a soil inhabitant and it splashes up onto the leaves and can cause some can cause some loss that way. The host range is pretty narrow, although I have seen it on wild lettuce weeds in the fields. The change over time, if we look at the scouting data down below, again, severity on the y-axis, time on the x-axis. There's not a real good pattern here. It's worse in some years than others. It's certainly worse in wet years than dry years. And again, if you were just jumping in and looking at this farm over a 5-year period, you could come to a very different conclusion than you will over this long a period. So I don't know what to say about this. I wouldn't say that this disease is being controlled by organic farming, and I wouldn't say it is getting worse from organic farming. It's just kind of there, and it's kind of annoying from time to time. I'm pretty sure if we weren't rotating our lettuce with a lot of other things, we'd have a much more severe problem, though. All right, Fusarium basal rot. Fusarium is kind of interesting. It was interesting in the previous talk that it appeared as though Fusaria was increasing perhaps on the organic farms. I've sometimes called Fusarium the organic farming disease. It does seem to enjoy high organic matter soils and soil building. It seems to be a bit of a soil inhabitant that kind of likes to be in soil even if it's not infecting a plant. But anyway, it sure messes up your onions, as you can see by that picture. The host range is narrow. It's just the onion family. If we look at our scouting data over time, and we've got 63 scouting notations, and you can see what looks like a pretty gradual increase in basal rot. And if we look at the yield of red onions over time, that's a terrible line to draw through data, but I just wanted to draw a line through my data, so I did. But you'll see that initially, and this is what happens with a lot of organic farmers, is they get better at growing the crop each year, and then something happens and there's some yield loss. And you can see up until about 2009 we were doing all right with it, and then after that things got pretty bad, and they've been pretty bad ever since. And the only reason that we haven't had worse problems is because he's been able to rotate his red onions to the other ranch where there isn't Fusarium. But so the farmer comment is certainly this is a problem and something I'm well aware of and trying to come up with ideas every year. Red onions are particularly problematic because we don't have really good resistant varieties. We don't really have resistant varieties to Fusarium, but we have some tolerant ones, but they're mostly non-red onions. And the money's often in red onions, so it's annoying. So yeah, we had significant losses and we switched some acres to the other ranch. All right, that's a Moon and Stars watermelon that we certainly don't grow anymore because it's particularly susceptible to verticillium. But if we look at our yields for watermelon, we can see from when he started growing it in 1996 right up until 2005, we got better and better at growing watermelons. Yields are going up. Starting around 2006, 2007, things are getting worse and yields are going down. And you see pretty profound drop in yield. So something's going on. It's probably not, just the weather. So what the problem is verticillium wilt of watermelon. There's a shot of a field that all the vines are in decline, pretty much a total loss there. We look at the change over time from our scouting data. So there's 41 scouting notations from 1997 to 2014, and you can see here that the scouting is really supporting the yield loss as the reason for the problem. And I was kind of fortunate that in 2000 I got excited about Verticillium, and I went through and I sampled a number of his different fields for the microsclerotia, which is the form that Verticillium survives in soil when it's not infecting a plant. And so I tested all these different blocks in 2000 approximately, and then again last year for this project. The great extension folks at Cooperative Extension, Salinas, Steve Koike and his lab there did the analysis for me. And you can see that the Verticillium is definitely increasing over time. A total of 42 in 1999 and 2001, and 396 microsclerotia in 2015. So we've got several different ways of documenting what's going on. And this is the problem, of course, in whole systems research, is there's any number of reasons why watermelon yields could have been going down. All the trucks could have turned over every year the last few years and dropped the watermelons on the road. I mean, there's any number of things. So the more support that we can have in the farm records, what the farmer says, what the yields are, what the scout is seeing, what the lab is determining, when we get enough of this, I think I can stand up in front of a bunch of scientists and say there might be something here without, feeling I'm going to be torn apart in the questions. So, this is a beginning look at whole farm systems. This is maybe a way that we can look at whole farm systems is let's get a lot of data from different sources together. Let's do it over a lot of time. Let's make sure it's well documented, and then maybe we can make some conclusions without having to reduce a system that's working into pulling out little bits of it and then finding out, well, when we pull this bit out, it actually wrecks this other part. So you can't just take systems apart sometimes to find out what's going on. So, does healthy soil make a healthy plant after 25 to 30 years? And of course the answer is maybe. So let's talk about what this kind of study can lead to, or what conclusions we can make. Well, as you saw, some diseases, that healthy soil, the diseases decreased, disappeared, never showed up. There are any number of soil-borne diseases that could be found at Persephone or at Phil Foster ranches and aren't. So the ones I talked about were ones that were seen and something happened. Either they stayed the same, went down, or went up. But that doesn't mean, there were any number of other possible diseases that could have been there that were not. So, it's kind of a glass half full, glass half empty kind of thing. If you're an optimistic person, you would say that, something's here, that these well-managed, successful organic farms building healthy soils are doing something to suppress soil-borne disease. Or you could say, well, yes, but look at, both farms do have serious problems that are affecting their production. And remember, these are the kind of problems that cause successful conventional farmers to look at organic and say, I don't want that kind of risk. My farm is successful now, conventionally, and when you superimpose these new diseases that I can't fumigate my way out of, you're increasing my risk, and I'm not going to take that risk and transition to organic. So the very farmers that we want to transition to organic, which are the very best of the conventional farmers, take this as a risk-reward kind of assessment, and they're not willing to take additional risk with their already successful farm to go into organic. So these are the things we need as organic researchers to be working on. So why did it happen for some of the diseases and not for all? Well, obviously pathogen biology and ecology are going to be important. How much? A couple minutes? Okay, I can do it. And we know this from a lot of reductionist good science studies with plant pathogens over the years, that some plant pathogens like the Fusaria seem to do quite well in soils in the absence of their host and survive quite long. Other plant pathogens die quite quickly when they don't have their host. And there are other things going on with other microorganisms that eat them or promote them. So obviously that's part of it. Now, is 25 to 30 years too short? And I differ with my colleagues a little bit over this. I'm starting to feel that maybe that is too short a time. I'd like to come back up here in 25 more years and present what happened in the next 25 years. And let's test that and see if that's true or not, because, you know, 25 years in the time since the Big Bang is really a very small amount of time. And 25 years of farming is extremely tiny amount of time. And these are ecological systems that make changes over long periods of time. So, you know, 25 to 30 years may not be enough. Although for like the Pythium and the, well, the damping off kind of systems, most of the functions seem to develop pretty early. So you transition to good organic soil building, and you see the results on your damping off pretty quickly. So two opposing ideas. And then are we missing tools, techniques? Obviously, yes. I need a Fusarium basal rot resistant red onion. We need to know how to manage watermelons for Verticillium. Some of the things, the techniques that seem to be working for strawberries don't seem to be working for us. But so, again, that's what we need. And so for the diseases that we're controlling, for the diseases that aren't there, my recommendation to other organic farmers is emulate these systems. These systems are going to be up on eOrganic in excruciating detail, so that if you're having trouble with a particular disease or a pest or something, you can go to the eOrganic farm, Persephone or Phil Foster, when we get it up there, and you can copy what they're doing. And for the others, research and breeders, please help us. And the ones I'm feeling are really tough, Verticillium and Fusarium.
We have time for probably one or two questions while I get the presentations changed over. Are there any questions?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question was, what do we define as a healthy soil? And so we have lab analysis, which shows us such things as you know, the organic matter, we like to see it going up over time, all the different nutrients, so that we like to see mineral balancing happening over time. And then beyond that, we're really looking at, do we have records of how often cover crops were planted, what was the tillage that was used, how much compost and gypsum was applied, things like that. So the metric healthy soil is a very slippery one. And people define it in different ways. We've kind of done it in a very holistic way of, if they've been following these techniques consistently and we see the organic matter and the mineral balancing going on, we have a healthy soil. But I can imagine that people could disagree with that. When you've got plants dying from Fusarium basal rot or Verticillium, it doesn't feel like a healthy soil. That's right. So he's asking about the biology. So we haven't been, you know, testing the microorganism functional groups and things like that to determine what a healthy soil is. We've been more focusing on, have the techniques been followed and what do the soil tests say, but we haven't been focusing on the microorganisms. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question. He's asking, do we have, you know, kind of a crop failure versus the field that the plant was planted in? Do we have data on that? We do have data on that. Am I going to be able to extract it in the time I have left in the grant? Probably not. But I will say that just as the field scout, there are hot fields and cold fields out there, and when, you know, Phil says, I'm going to plant in S7, I'm going to plant watermelons this year, I'm like, oh no. Instead of doing something useful, I'm going to spend my days tramping up and down documenting a crop failure rather than something more interesting. So yeah, there are hot fields and cold fields. The data is there, but I'm not sure I'm going to have a chance to actually identify it. The question was, have I noticed a correlation between shorter rotations and higher crop failures? And I would say no. There's so much rotation there that it is very difficult to remember from year to year what was there last, but you just know, like for instance, onions don't appear once but every 5 years, and with 2.5 crops per year, that's, you know, what, 12, 13 crops of something in between onions, a huge amount of rotation. Yet those Fusarium are still there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doug. I enjoyed it. I hope everybody else did too. A lot of